under the shadow of the Spanish Inquisition, being a woman accused of heresy, witchcraft, or even immodesty could mean a fate more terrifying than death itself. The charge alone, often whispered by a neighbor or priest, was enough to condemn her. No evidence was needed. No defense was heard. Known as La Suprema, the Inquisition operated with a ruthless efficiency. Though originally established in 1478 by Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile to root out religious dissent, it quickly expanded its authority. Women, particularly those who deviated from societal norms, healers, midwives, widows, and even outspoken wives, were disproportionately vulnerable. Many were accused of brujeria, witchcraft, or of conspiring with the devil. Once named in an edito de fe, a public notice of accusations, the accused woman was dragged from her home, shackled, and confined to dark, damp prison cells. She would wait for days or weeks, denied all knowledge of her charges. Fear itself was a form of torment. The inquisitors were not bound by mercy, they sought confession, not truth. Torture was not merely permitted. It was institutionalized. Pope Innocent IV had sanctioned its use as early as 1252, and under the Inquisition, it became a cold tool of control. The aim was never justice, it was submission. To be a woman in the hands of the Inquisition was to be rendered voiceless. Her body became the battlefield, her silence an admission, and her scream an inevitability. Strappado, dislocated without a drop of blood. It was silent in the chamber, but not still. Somewhere above, rope creaked as it slid through a pulley. This was the strappado, a device deceptively simple in appearance. A single rope, a hook, and a sealing beam. No blades. No flames. And yet, among the most feared instruments of the Spanish Inquisition. Accused women were brought before this device not for execution, but for confession. Once sentenced to torture, they were led into the chamber, their wrists bound tightly behind their back. The rope was then looped through the ceiling and attached to their arms. With a nod from the inquisitor, the executioner hoisted them into the air, by their arms alone. The shoulders bore the full weight, often leading to severe joint damage and lasting physical consequences. There was no blood, no visible wound. What made the strappado especially cruel was its illusion of mercy. In the records of the Inquisition, this method was classified as a moderate form of persuasion. They argued it left no scars. But the reality was different. Muscles tore. Nerves suffered lasting damage. Arms could be rendered permanently useless. Sometimes, the torture was made worse by sudden drops, lowering the victim slightly before jerking her back up, heightening the internal trauma. Women who cried out were not believed. Those who refused to speak were lifted again and again. There are no exact numbers for how many women endured the strappado during the centuries of the Inquisition. Many records were lost, or perhaps never written. What survives are the testimonies of a few and the silent echoes of many more. Inquisition chambers across Spain and its colonies were equipped with these devices, their use spanning from the late 15th century well into the 18th. In the eyes of the Inquisition, this was not punishment. It was purification. But for the women accused, many of whom were never proven guilty, it was a descent into suffering, inflicted not by mobs or soldiers, but by a system that believed pain could lead to salvation. The iron spider, agony forged in fire. Its shape was unmistakable, long, curved metal arms ending in cruel hooks, forged not for restraint, but for destruction. The device was known as the iron spider, and its very name whispered terror into the hearts of women accused by the Spanish Inquisition. Designed specifically for female victims, it was an implement of pain masked as interrogation. The iron spider was typically fastened to a stone wall in a cold, echoing chamber. Victims were brought forward, bound, accused, and often already weakened by hunger, fear, or prior ordeals. Historical accounts suggest that inquisitors favored areas of the body that would cause lasting humiliation or disablement. The metal prongs, often heated in fire beforehand, were positioned against exposed area. The purpose was not to extract truth through logic, but to coerce confessions through unbearable distress. Though records are sparse, often intentionally destroyed or left vague, The iron spider was reportedly used against women accused of heresy, adultery, or of having relations deemed impure by religious authorities. Unlike more publicly visible forms of torture, the iron spider left scars that were not just physical, but deeply psychological. Survivors, if any, lived with mutilation that served as a permanent marker of their humiliation. And yet, these women were never truly tried in the legal sense. Inquisitorial courts operated in secrecy, and guilt was often assumed the moment an accusation was made. Perhaps the most harrowing aspect of this device was how deliberately it was tailored to women. The Inquisition, while publicly committed to saving souls, often targeted the female body as both a symbol of temptation and a site of control. Devices like the iron spider were not random tools, they were calculated, ritualized acts of domination, executed under the guise of piety. The rack, stretching truth from the accused. Iron chains clattered as a woman's wrists and ankles were fastened to opposite ends of a wooden frame. Known historically as la tortura del potro, the torture of the colt, this device was simple in design but excruciating in function. The woman was not yet guilty in the eyes of the law. She had only been accused, perhaps of witchcraft, heresy, or consorting with the devil. And yet, her body was about to become the battleground for a confession she may never have wanted to give. The rack, as it was known in later English, consisted of a rectangular wooden frame with rollers at either end. Ropes were attached to the victim's wrists and ankles. As interrogators turned the rollers, sometimes slowly, sometimes with sudden violence, the ropes would tighten, pulling the limbs in opposite directions. The pain was relentless, not meant to kill, but to crush the spirit. This method was used under the authority of the Spanish Inquisition, known formally as the Tribunal del Santo Oficio de la Inquisition. Though the Inquisition publicly emphasized spiritual correction over cruelty, documents from the period, including Procesos Inquisitorios, inquisitorial trial records, reveal its systematic reliance on moderate torture to extract confessions, especially from women. Many accused heretics were illiterate or unfamiliar with Latin, the language in which their charges were read. Under such conditions, the rack became not just an instrument of pain, but a means of forced submission to both religious and institutional authority. Women were especially vulnerable. Accusations of sorcery or moral transgression, often based on hearsay or local suspicion, could be enough to justify interrogation under extreme conditions. Once strapped to the rack, the accused was asked questions repeatedly. If she denied guilt, the rollers turned further. If she confessed, it was often because her body could bear no more. Some chroniclers recorded that confessions were followed by absolution and penance. Others were burned at the stake. The rack left no visible blood, but it dismantled lives. For the Inquisition, the rack was a silent partner in its mission of control, forcing the truth not by reason, but by rupture. The pair of anguish, a tool of silent terror. She sat in silence, her fate sealed behind the thick stone walls of an inquisitorial chamber. There were no crowds, no formal court, only the dim light of a torch and the presence of a device known in later centuries as the pair of anguish. Though its exact origin remains debated, this metal instrument is cited in several post-Inquisition accounts and later torture catalogs. Shaped like a pear and divided into segmented petals, the device was used in inquisitorial settings to punish individuals accused of various transgressions. Depending on the nature of the accusation, it was inserted into a bodily orifice and then expanded by turning a screw, causing intense internal pain without visible injury. The device, made of iron, was not designed to kill outright. It did not cause external bleeding, and the pain it inflicted was internal. When inserted into the mouth, it was often used on those accused of blasphemy or spreading heretical speech. For women, however, its use was most commonly linked to accusations of moral transgression, occult practices, or associations deemed spiritually corrupt. Its use, whether historically confirmed in full by contemporary Spanish Inquisition records or inferred from later legal and punitive manuals, reflected a disturbing intersection of control, shame, and bodily violation. While not mentioned explicitly in the core trial logs of the Tribunal del Santo Oficio, Its categorization among instruments of ecclesiastical torture in post-Inquisition collections suggests it belonged to the broader punitive culture shaped by that era. The Inquisition maintained that torture was to be applied without effusion of blood. Devices like the pear, then, met the criteria, inflicting extreme pain, yet leaving no open wounds. Its psychological effect was as severe as its physical one. The act of forced insertion was an assertion of dominance, especially in a system where moral purity was policed through ritualized suffering. It weaponized the body's own openings, its most vulnerable passages, to punish women not only for what they did, but for what others claimed they represented. The judgment chair, spikes for the accused. Known in later texts as the judgment chair, or sometimes the interrogation chair, this device was forged entirely from iron or thick hardwood and covered with hundreds, sometimes thousands, of sharp metal spikes. These protrusions were deliberately positioned on the seat, backrest, armrests, leg supports, and even the footrest. Once seated, the accused, often a woman charged with witchcraft, heresy, or moral transgression, would be strapped tightly in place. Historical models of the torture chair appear throughout early modern Europe, but Inquisition-aligned jurisdictions preserved its symbolism with special precision. The victim was forced to remain motionless. Iron bindings at the wrists, ankles, neck, and waist ensured that any attempt to shift weight, to escape even slightly, would press her skin further into the spikes. In some instances, the chair was heated from below with coals, turning pain into searing torture. The Spanish Inquisition did not always list specific devices by name in its official archives. However, accounts from regions under inquisitorial influence, particularly in Aragon, Castile, and the Kingdom of Naples, reveal the use of silla de interrogar, interrogation chair, as a method of prejudicial coercion. It was intended not to kill, but to extract information, force confession, or soften the will before further questioning. Once strapped into the judgment chair, the accused was asked to confess. Refusal meant hours, sometimes days, of restrained agony. The judgment chair did not declare guilt. It merely made resistance unbearable. In the eyes of the inquisitors, that was often more than enough. The Spanish Inquisition weaponized fear, faith, and flesh to enforce obedience, not only through execution, but through instruments that redefined the limits of human suffering. How did religious courts justify torment in the name of salvation? Comment below. As Johann Weyer, a 16th-century physician who opposed witch trials, warned, the cruelty of these men is not less than that of the tormentors of the martyrs.